Great, thank you. Oh, absolutely, yes. Okay, good evening, everyone. It is 6:30 p.m., so I'm going to call to order the regular council meeting for Monday, September 26th. It is 6:30 p.m. I would like to acknowledge with respect that we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, and we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. A couple things. First of all, on the approval of the agenda, there was an error with one of the reports. Staff have requested that the agenda be amended to remove Appendix 1 from Agenda Item 7.6, Bylaw number 1924, Land Use Amendment 301 Olympian Way and 640 Medalist Avenue regarding third reading and adoption. That letter was actually for Royal Beach and was just accidentally amended onto the Olympic View one. Before I go to looking for approval of the agenda, Councillor Day has requested.
I just have an amendment that I'd like to make for the agenda. So when we get to the agenda, if I could make that amendment.
Sure. Okay. So I will look for a motion to, and what we'll do is we'll actually get a mover and seconder so that somebody can also amend it. So may I get a mover and a seconder in regards with the amendment that I just mentioned about 7.6. Can I get approval of the agenda for the near term, long term, and regular council meeting of September 26th? Can I get a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Logan. Councillor Day, you have an amendment.
Thank you. I would like to ask that we remove item, sorry, just got the right number, 6.3 regarding the Public Works Administration Building from tonight's agenda. I did call and speak to staff, and after talking to staff, probably the best way to handle it would be to just remove it from the agenda. That way it will come forward with the new council at whichever meeting makes the most sense for the new council.
Okay. Do I have a seconder to that motion? Seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. Discussion? Councillor Day, would you like to explain why?
So being as this is a large request that will have long-term impacts on the budget, when I first thought about this item, I thought that perhaps it would be better if we were discussing this at budget time so that we were aware of all the potential implications. And then as I explored that option further, I realized that it would make a great deal of sense just to not deal with it right at this particular meeting, and that it needs to be understood and supported coming forward with the new council. So that hence my suggestion that we take it off this agenda. It doesn't need a definite date. It will come back to council at whichever meeting makes the most sense for the new council.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
I'd like us to discuss the item because I'd like to, at the time, move that this report come back with the funding models attached, rather than us trying to vote, or anybody trying to vote on this without knowing what the funding method would be.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, so then I will call the question. Those in opposition to the amendment. Councillor Parkinson, Logan, Jansen, Mayor Martin, and Councillor Baxter. So that motion fails. Brings us back to the main motion, which is the near-term, long-term, and regular council meeting. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to Mayor's message. The only message that I have this evening is that I was fortunate enough to go to C-SPAN, the Victoria Shipyards, They have officially opened at Allendale. They are completely operational. They have brought their staff, and it was just a wonderful celebration that we are now creating employment here in the city of Colwood with an excellent employer like C-SPAN. That's my message for this evening. And clearly we have an election October 15th. So if anyone was not aware of that, please come out to the polls. You have chances October 5th, October 12th, and October 15th. Moving on to the adoption and receipt of minutes. This is for the regular council meeting minutes of August 29th. Are there any errors, omissions? If not, I will say that they are adopted unanimously and move on to public participation. Members of the public will be provided an opportunity to present concerns or ask questions of council. Comments pertaining to the following matters that have been subject to a public hearing are prohibited at this meeting. Bylaw number 1913, CD 33, 2350 Souk Road. Bylaw number 1700-06, Olympic View Local Area Plan. Bylaw number 1924, CD2, Olympic View. Bylaw number 1700-07, Royal Beach. And bylaw number 1951, CD30, Royal Beach. With that, we did receive 2 written submissions regarding council remuneration. They have been appended to the agenda. If there are members of the public wishing to speak, this is your opportunity. You have 2 minutes, and I'm assuming staff are timing.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is John English. I live in Colwood at Proctor Place. I'm speaking to you this evening on behalf of the Royal Bay Homeowners Association. You may not know, and you probably don't know, but some time ago, I was retained by the government of British Columbia to help them resolve and manage remuneration issues. In addition to having directed compensation management practices for some of BC's and Canada's largest public and private sector organizations, I've also taught compensation management at the Faculty of Business at Simon Fraser University for a number of years. I'm here this evening to tell you that you'd be making a very big mistake by approving an 85% increase in remuneration for the mayor and council positions. Approving an increase which is more than 2.5 times larger than the increase of our neighboring municipality of View Royal is not the responsible thing to do. The cost and the damage done by such a decision will extend far beyond the direct increased costs of remuneration for these positions. So we would ask that Mayor Martin, Councillor Jansen, Councillor Logan, Councillor Baxter, Councillor Parkinson follow the leadership being demonstrated by Councillors Kobayashi and Cynthia Day and do the right thing for the city and its citizens. We ask that you vote against a rushed approval of this huge increase at this time.
30-second warning.
We ask that you instead defer any decision on increasing remuneration for the mayor and council positions until after the upcoming election. After the election, a thoughtful review could then be conducted to ensure that whatever increase is approved is both appropriate and implemented in a responsible manner. Thank you.
I'm just pausing. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? And staff, I will just confirm, is there anyone online wishing to speak? I know there wasn't anybody registered. Okay. Last opportunity. Okay. I'm going to. This moves on to new business 6.1. Councillor Parkinson regarding municipal fees and charges annual review. This was a notice of motion from the August 29th council meeting. Councillor Parkinson.
Should I spare you reading the whole motion? The intent of the motion, I think, is pretty clear.
Sure.
Or I'll read it if you like.
Yeah, you know what, let's go ahead. And, you know what we'll do,
Okay.
actually, Councillor Parkinson, what we'll do is we'll have you read the motion Then I'll look for a seconder and then I'll let you motivate after that.
Perfect. The motion is that staff report to the Finance and Governance Committee on an annual basis in November/December of every year, all charges and fees levied by the municipality. And that staff make recommendations for adjustments to fees and charges. And that staff make recommendations on fees and charges that should be reviewed in more detail. And that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend to Committee of the Whole and Council amendments to fees and charges on an annual basis. And further, that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend a detailed review and timeline of any fees and charges that require review and update.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder to that motion? Seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. Councillor Parkinson, would you like to motivate?
Thank you, Worship. I mean, obviously, we're heading into or in the middle of inflationary times that we haven't seen for a while. But perhaps more importantly, the reason I wanted to bring this forward is we do, as a council, spend a lot of time in service review on an annual basis, looking at our spend and how much we want to increase or adjust various programs within the city. We don't seem to spend a lot of time reviewing the income side of our work. What are the revenues? And I think if we just think about in the last year, what we've realized in the last year is that our DCCs were quite significantly out of date and required a significant adjustment. The same with our community amenity charges that we realized that they hadn't been looked at for quite a while. And I guess the third one was just the fees and charges we were doing for sewer service installations. So while not a major part of the budget, I think it's still important that we keep our eyes on that part of our budget. Obviously, every time that we don't put in sufficient funds in the, for instance, the DCC part, that means money comes from somewhere else, and it could be, future increases in DCCs. It could be from taxpayers or something like that. But I just believe that we should be spending some time reviewing all that kind of stuff so that we can make sure that our citizens are getting value out of it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I support the idea. I'm a little concerned that November, December for the fees and charges that come from other organizations, which is actually a very significant portion of what our tax calculation is. So West Shore Parks and Rec may not have their requisition finalized in November, December. CRD certainly won't have their charges finalized at that time of year, but it would be very helpful, I think, to have that discussion in a format where there's greater participation of the public. Even if we're still talking about last year's charges and maybe don't yet know what they'll be for the year that's coming. I think it's really important that the format be a very inclusive one, so that not only are we apprising council, but the public, because the development cost charge deficit is something that we identified for many years before we were able to tackle it, simply because of staff resourcing and how many projects were on the go. Because I recall discussing development cost charges in 2016 and us just trying our best to get to it, but knowing that it's hard to get to the front of the queue because everybody has a lot of work on their plate already. Thank you.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I echo your comments, Councillor Parkinson. The one thing that is always kind of nasty is when you're doing these negotiations, and if you haven't done them for a long time, there's a lot of sticker shock for a lot of people. So I think doing this on an annual basis is a really good idea. I don't know about the timing. I mean, you make a great point, Councillor Day, and if you have a better way of, a better date for this, sure like to hear that. But overall, the concept is the right concept as far as I'm concerned. Thank you very much.
Councillor Parkinson, you wanted to reply?
If I may, just to clarify that other agencies, taxes such as the CRD and West Shore Parks and Recs were not the intent here. It was more just the internal charges that the city has. As the November-December date, I realize that's coming up on us quickly. And then perhaps that's my slowness off the mark, but I did start talking about this in the summer. Then we had a hiatus for a bit, and then it hit a new committee meeting, and then it's finally rising up to the council. So that's I'll chalk that up to my inexperience and not understanding just how long the process went. And it could be that in the first year, all we're going to get is a list of here's what the charges are today, and we haven't had time to look at them to say, are they up to date, or are they not? And maybe at that point, council will just look at them and say, okay, well, let's think about them for a year, or let's apply a across the board inflationary figure or something like that. But we have to start somewhere, and obviously having this roughly the same time we're looking at service review and taxation budgets makes sense to me. So I think even if it's not ideal, I think starting the process is worthwhile. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Congratulations. Look at that. You got one. Well done. 1 in 4 years. Moving on to 6.2, 2022 Park Management Planning Update. Ms. Collinkson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm coming to you virtually tonight. So over the last few years, there's been considerable efforts put into parks planning in Colwood. 2021 saw the endorsement of the city's first ever Parks and Rec master plan, and the following year, individual management plans for Colwood Creek Park, Lookout Lake Park, and Ocean View. We were last before you in June, saying that we're going to launch into park management planning at Latoria Creek and Havenwood Park. And we're here before you tonight to talk about what we've heard over the last couple of months, as well as talk about where we're going from here. So Lanark Consulting has been supporting park management planning for the city, and I'll turn it over to Kate to offer the presentation. Kate?
Wonderful. Thank you, Jill. And good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm delighted to be here to join you and share the latest updates on Havenwood and Latoria Creek Park plans and the processes that are underway. So this evening, I'll be sharing highlights about each project, and my focus will be summarizing phase 1 and 2 engagement, as well as how that sets us up for phase 3 drafting the plans, which is where we are and what's currently underway. So in terms of the process, both park plans are being carried out concurrently under the same 3-phase process, and it'll be similar from past processes that have been completed over the last year or two. Phase 1 was focused on information gathering and laying groundwork. Staff completed a council check-in at that point prior to advancing to phase 2. Phase 2 is focused on the exploration of draft ideas for community input, and that was the more substantive community input opportunity with engagement, pop-ups, and an online questionnaire. And then phase 3 is drafting the management plans. And this is the phase that's in its early stages currently. And once the draft plans are complete, we'll be coming back to council in about December to share these. And then we'll be proceeding to engage the broader public for phase 3 engagement in the new year, looking to finalize the plans with revisions for about March. And it goes without saying, but in order to be successful, these plans will need the continued involvement of council to encourage people to participate and be involved so that there's broad and good input for us to work with. So on the following slides, I'll summarize the highlights of the project process and what we heard, especially in phases 1 and 2 so far. So outreach is how we get the word out about the projects and about the engagement events and opportunities. And we've used a mix of digital and non-digital tools here in order to reach a wide audience and make sure that we're addressing a good cross-section of the community. So the digital tools used included the project webpage, the Let's Talk Colwood page, social media campaign, and e-notification distribution. And the e-notification is a more targeted and often more successful at gaining involvement and input since it's a little bit more focused. We also had non-digital tools, which is quite important to make sure that we're keeping things open and accessible. The most notable being the large-scale posters that were produced and put up in the parks at each entrance to each of the parks. And this really helped to reach existing users and neighbors. We also did stakeholder referrals and had project cards distributed for project awareness at park walks and similar events. So as a summary of the engagement opportunities in these processes so far over the last few months, we began in phase 1 with the park walks, one at each park, as well as an online stakeholder workshop for phase 1. And then for phase 2, there were 3 pop-up events. It was decided that hosting these events would be actually more successful outside of the parks in question, but alongside other community events that were happening. And this was mostly determined since Havenwood and Latoya Creek Park visitors are often on the move, on trails, and at various points in the day, but there isn't a key point in the day where there's a very high number. And so in order to get more people, we put signs up all within the parks physically themselves, and we engaged people at events that were happening elsewhere but nearby in the community. It was also a recognition that people have a mix of comfort levels for physical events. And so all of the materials that were made available at the online and in-person events in the phases were also made available online for a 7-week window for people to access at their leisure. And so the all materials were kind of dual produced in hard copy and in digital format. So based on the input received in phase 1, as well as consideration for input that was received in prior processes like the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, we identified 5 key themes, and these themes were used to organize a list of early ideas for community review and feedback in the phase 2 engagement. So the themes are the same for both parks, and that's largely a fact or coming from the fact that they're both nature parks and serve a similar function both presently and anticipated in the future. So the 5 themes were park trails, connectivity, wayfinding and signage, park furnishings, and environmental conservation. So for each park, a graphic map was produced to illustrate the early ideas list of items being considered. And the maps and early ideas lists were presented at the events as well as in the online materials that were available. So for Havenwood Park, there were 21 early ideas explored, which included things like developing new trails to improve and clarify the trails network, integrating new bench and seating opportunities, as well as decommissioning informal trails from environmentally sensitive areas. For Latoya Creek Park, the early ideas list and corresponding map explored 18 ideas, lots of similar themes, but some specific items that were different from Havenwood. There were items such as adding new trail connections to adjacent neighborhoods, especially in consideration of development ongoing and anticipated in Royal Bay, defining on-leash dog areas, and adding bicycle parking. So the next few slides summarize who we heard from in the phase 2 events and community survey. So 80 people submitted surveys for Havenwood and 61 were submitted for Latoya Creek. We note that the numbers of those who are engaged overall at the events and online were 3 to 4 times higher than the number that actually participated in submitting comments, pardon me. And we anticipate this is mostly a matter of silent support in that the subject matter of these 2 parks and the definition of them as nature parks kind of narrows the window and focuses the discussion points. And the comments that were heard in conversations, there was mostly support. And so we're thinking that that is in part the reflection of numbers we're seeing here. So to help us understand and frame the feedback data that we did receive, we reviewed demographics of respondents, and the key takeaway notes here are that youth and adults under the age of 34 are underrepresented, and on the flip side, the majority of respondents were over the age of 55, and so that overrepresents that portion of the demographic compared with the makeup of the city. But also important to note that these are common trends in participation in the past processes that we've seen over the last couple of years in Colwood. And these are also similar trends that we see in other communities with this type of process as well. So not exact distribution, but somewhat anticipated. And so although younger demographics were underrepresented in the recorded respondents, about a third of them did communicate that they have children under the age of 18 at home and are responding on behalf of their families. So although those individuals 18 and under, 24 and under didn't participate themselves, they are represented in a secondhand kind of way here. And then for both surveys, the majority of response came from the neighborhoods in direct proximity to each of the parks. And so for Havenwood, this was Triangle Mountain, Latoria, and Wishart South. And similarly, Latoria Creek was the nearby areas, Royal Bay, Latoria, and Triangle Mountain. There was limited response from residents in other neighborhoods, although there was some, and then there was a small portion of response for residents who use the park but are located in neighboring communities outside of Colwood. This slide demonstrates people were reached through a range of both digital and non-digital means, and the two top methods of how people were reached were the Let's Talk Colwood website and on the ground through the signs in the parks. And so the diversity in how people were reached is a positive in terms of gaining more varied representation. And we're also, and just in back of mind when we consider the data and review it, we're pleased that there was a pretty even spread between digital and non-digital tools, just again, leaning towards knowing that there was access to a range of participants. So the good stuff, what we heard, the next 3 slides or so are really the key points and distillation of what we heard from the input received. And I've summarized the key points for both Havenwood and Latoria Creek side by side, and that's mostly because there's quite a bit of overlap between the two, and it made sense to go through it in that way and kind of get a sense of where each park was, both similarities and then the distinct differences. So first, what participants most support? For Havenwood, the strongest support was for maintaining the park's unique natural character and limiting new park amenities, protecting existing trees, forested areas, and riparian areas, ongoing support for park stewardship groups, and upgrades to park trails while limiting impacts to sensitive ecosystems. For Latoria Creek, the strongest support was for preserving the park's forested, riparian areas and natural character, maintaining and expanding the existing park trail network, integrating new trail connections to Royal Bay and the Beach to Mountain Trail network. In terms of concerns, for Havenwood, primary concerns were increased park use and demands on the park's trail network, natural areas, and parking areas, degradation of sensitive ecosystems, expansion of parking at secondary park entrances, for example, off of Resolution Way to the north side of the park, and management of invasive species within the park. For Latoria Creek, a somewhat similar list with slightly different ordering. Again, degradation of sensitive areas in the park, including riparian areas, increased demand on the park due to surrounding developments, managing invasive species within the park, and balancing and managing dog off-leash and on-leash areas. And then in terms of mixed opinion, there were 2 topics that stood out that had somewhat even input, but on 2 sides of the coin. And they're the same 2 topics for both parks. And so that was for new passive amenities. And so there was a divide where some supported additional things like park benches and picnic areas, things that are aligned with the nature park, but would be change. And on the other side, even those passive elements were not strongly supported, and some wanted to see or limit change really of any kind within the parks. And the second mixed topic was for dogs and for the off-leash, on-leash discussion. And this topic outside of these 2 parks is one that often has 2 distinct sides. Many respondents on one hand who are dog owners primarily are quite interested in seeing off-leash areas maintained within the parks, and we're concerned about a change which would have some areas be on-leash only. And at the same time, several respondents indicated that a limitation or concern of their current park use and future use is dogs being off-leash and the impacts to the environment or the accessibility and safety to all on the trails. So the key points that I've just gone through in terms of support, concern, and mixed opinions are being used to inform and refine our directions in drafting the plans. And that's what's happening currently or has just begun in the last month or so for phase 3. And the draft plan development will be ongoing this fall. Key next steps are for council review of the draft plans in December, and then public referral and review following that in early 2023, and then with the aim of finalizing the plans in March. So with that, I will turn it back to Jill and Mayor and Council. If there are questions, we'd be happy to answer. And otherwise, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Jill, oh, excuse me, Ms. Collingston, I'm assuming you're done?
I am done unless there's any questions.
Okay, thank you. I will go to, I have a list, Councillor Day, Parkinson, then Kobayashi. Councillor Day.
Thank you. Very well done on tackling the important job of getting feedback on our parks. But I have to say there's a couple of issues that are missing that I think are very important. And that is the accessibility of the parks. And that has not come up in any of the areas or the metrics that you are measuring or looking at. And one of the goals that I had for many years trying to promote parks in Colwood was to ensure that there's at least one, even a small part of a park that is accessible for people who may need to use mobility aids, etc., to enjoy the park. Because even though you may not be able to do the stairs in Literary Creek Park, you might be able to use a portion of the flatter area to get out and do your physical rehab if you've had an injury, or just to get some mental well-being from being out in nature. And so I would really like to see all of our parks plans include at least a measurement of how much area in the park is accessible, and continually work towards the goal of increasing that over time where we're able to. That is available in Havenwood Park in the less elevated areas. The main trail that comes off Veterans Memorial Park could be linked to the other main trail that comes back from the southern portion of the park to make a loop of accessibility. The same is true in Colwood Creek Park, where on the trails you go from, say, the entrance to the park to point 6, and perhaps a return route could be found through the lower areas. Now there is a connection shown on your map as 8B, where a trail would go to a future linear park trail connection for the Latoria South Parks plan. And that link, I believe, has some topographic challenges that need to be considered when we're putting them on a map like this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's all I've got.
Great, thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for the presentation. I found it very informative, the maps that really highlighted to me the size of these parks compared to the adjacent parcels. I guess I should have had a grasp of that visually or somewhere before, but I didn't. So just a couple of quick questions. And that's how do you deal with the on-off leash debate? You know, I think you noted that it was pretty split down the middle. How does one resolve that? And another question while I'm here, I think I saw on one of the parks, perhaps Havenwood, that 91% of the respondents arrived by foot or walking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, I saw that there was a very low appetite for more parking spaces, you know, understandable. But again, I think, you know, one has to look at, I guess, more parking spaces will increase use of the park, which is probably a global good and a perhaps neighborhood not so good. I'm not so sure. So I just was curious how you wrestle with those two issues.
Would you like to go first, Kate, or would you
I
like
was going to
to
say through the speaker, should I respond? Yes, I can. So maybe I'll firstly do a brief response to Councillor Day and accessibility, and then I'll move on to the two questions from Councillor Parkinson. In terms of accessibility, although it's not a numbered item on the list, there was consideration for accessible loop trails in both parks. And as Councillor Day noted, there are some very practical limitations to broad accessibility in the entire park space. Part of the terrain in each park is such that it is not universally accessible. That being said, Havenwood in particular has some areas with grading and terrain that would be more conducive, and Latoria has select areas as well. So it is a consideration that we have carried forward, and we did hear some commentary on it. And I guess just as a foundation point for each of these plans, we do look back to the Parks and Rec master plan and the goals that were set aside there, which include one very specifically on accessibility and inclusivity, and has the kind of general higher end policy regarding that. And so when we go about this park management plan and actually drafting it, that's when we'll look to identify what specific improvements are able to be made, as well as identifying there are limitations in both of these parks in terms of them being nature park areas and the terrain, that there will be portions of the park spaces that are accessible, and there will be portions that will sign and indicate will require a different level of ability in order to navigate. And then I guess moving on to the two questions, one about dogs and the other about access. So for the dog discussion, we look both at these parks themselves, and then we also look to the overall park network. And so in past, prior to the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and as Colwood has grown and now has a management system which classifies and identifies each park space, and are starting to develop further management plans as the population grows and the demands in the parks increase, we'll be looking to identify and balance the needs of off-leash and on-leash users. We know that for both of these parks, as well as many parks in the city, dog walking is one of the primary uses of these parks. And so we certainly want to look for the best opportunities to accommodate those uses to continue, and for the additional dog owners that'll be in these areas. And then at the same time, we need to balance the needs of the overall trail users and identify, is there some areas that we need to set aside as being on leash only in order to protect environmentally sensitive areas, or they're the highest use routes within the park to make it most broadly accessible. And so in both of these plans, we're looking at a little bit of a balanced approach, which combines considerations for both of those parties. There isn't a perfect solution. Ultimately, there is probably going to be a level of disappointment for each of those users unless we go completely one way or completely the other. So we try and look at these two parks within the entire system and identify the most important areas for change. And then in terms of access, yes, that's a very good point. I tried to keep the presentation brief, and I didn't go through the data response from each of the questions, but it was quite notable for both parks, actually, that the vast majority of the people who responded were both people who live nearby and who access the park by walking. And so there was a much more limited number of individuals that access the park by vehicle. And so our considerations, as Colwood grows, and these are the two most generous nature park spaces in the city. And so we want to look to how we accommodate for the growth and change needed, both in the directly adjacent areas, as well as for those that'll be looking for a nature space that, and this is maybe perhaps outside of walking distance for them. And so we'll be, in both parks, we're not looking to expand the nature park area or tree clearing or things like this in order to accommodate on-site parking. We're looking at the adjacent parking areas that are provided at road ends and looking if there can be clarification or improvement in how those areas are signed and managed. So again, it's a bit of a balance point in recognizing need of access in various modes, but not wanting, we're not looking to have a significant disruption of the existing park space itself in order to devote to parking.
I'll follow up with one comment with Kate. Is one of the early areas where we started to thematize things into is regarding wayfinding and signage. And so wayfinding and signage will actually hopefully provide direction and accessibility, dog on and off areas, as well as parking considerations. So they are 3 thematic areas, which have been prevalent in both of our largest nature parks.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just a quick, just confirmation, what I heard is part of the deliverables is to have a recommendation for the on-leash, off-leash issue, because you're right, it's very emotional, very emotional. And you're right, it's very divided. So that's good to hear. The second question I have is just a clarification. You talk about this thing called upgrades to park trails. Can you elaborate what that exactly means? I'm not too sure what that means.
Certainly. Yeah, so for upgrades to park trails, and maybe I'll go through a little bit, I'll start maybe with Havenwood. So Havenwood both suggested upgrades as well as certain trails in the nature, or sorry, I'll back up one step. There's actually only a small portion of the existing trails in Havenwood that are sanctioned or designated trails, and there's several other trails within the park. And so as part of our review and draft directions and the map that was presented, we've suggested that the formal trail network takes on, and through wayfinding and signage and mapping and maintenance, expands the formal trails to include some of the what we term nature trails that exist currently in the park. And we've also looked at the trails that were not formally, that were not formalized previous. And we've identified a few areas where we've actually suggested to remove some of those trails because they're accessing sensitive areas. And we've looked to consolidate and provide a good range of routes and options that maintains different classes of trails, from a more accessible and wide trail standard to a nature trail standard. And so when we refer to the upgrades for all of those trails comprehensively, they'd be a little bit different depending on the classification of trail. So for the primary trails, upgrades would be looking at areas, if there are drainage issues, or making sure that there's adequate width and distance in surfacing. In some of the areas that are identified as nature trails, the upgrades are predominantly looking to areas that are really failing or causing issues, but there isn't an intention to upgrade all of the trails in Havenwood, for instance, to be the same level or standards. So there will remain trails that will be narrower, and they have more terrain, they have rocks and roots and things that exist, and there isn't the intention to develop that to the same trail standard as exists in the primary trail routes through the park.
Super, thank you very much.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one note for you, and that is that the Intermunicipal Advisory Committee on Disability Issues did, when they created our user-friendly trail guide, we did also create a toolkit for how to designate trails as to their level of accessibility without having to declare it accessible in a way that would create a liability issue for Colwood. And that is a very simple system of identifying the elevations and the lengths of a trail on the sign. And I'm very hopeful that we would be able to include that because that works for families with a stroller as well as it works for my friends in wheelchairs. So, and everything in between, including walkers and canes and stroke issues, where that's a very important part of many people's recovery. So I'm just very hopeful you will include that.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any other hands. I'm going to assume you guys don't have anything else that you'd like to add just before I let you go. Nope. Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking. So I don't need a motion. That was just an update. So that's going to move us to 6.3. This is Mr. Russell, our Deputy Director of Public Works Administration Building Size Options.
Good evening, through the chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. Following the direction received at the May 2nd council meeting, staff have worked to establish a Class D estimate for the design and construction of the Public Works Administration building, incorporating the strategic initiatives described in the facility feasibility study, future utility, net zero capability, and post-disaster strength. Staff have compiled estimated costs relating to 3 different building options for consideration to align scope and budget before moving further. The principal difference between the 3 building options is the size dedicated for future utility. The largest building at 973 square meters has the capacity to absorb growth over the next 30 years, accepting multiple departments from City Hall and acting as a general city support. In contrast, the smallest building option at 448 square meters is focused on the current needs of public works, while still embracing the net zero and post-disaster objectives. The third option, at a size of 589 square meters, charts a middle course, accounting for projected growth out to 2037. In the summary of costs related to each of these proposed buildings, staff have worked to account for various types of contingency, with special consideration for possible effects of inflation to ensure that the project is financially sound. Tonight, staff are requesting direction. If given a mandate to move forward with one of the 3 options, the next step in the process will be the release of an RFP to assemble a project team. Staff have identified the progressive design build procurement method as the ideal mechanism to deliver this project. And Michael Erlanger from Collier's Project Leaders has been providing guidance to staff on the intricacies of delivering a project of this scale. He is here tonight to help answer questions that arise. 2 of the key benefits to the progressive design build method are 1, that it would allow Colwick to work directly with the designer and builder concurrently with a high level of control. And 2, there would be an optional exit point before the final design that could be exercised if the project becomes unfeasible for financial or other reasons. Regardless of size, a permanent structure would be an immeasurable benefit for Colwood operations. Thank you for your time and for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you. I will look to Councillor Parkinson first and then Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Worship. I would be very interested in hearing from the consultant about the progressive design build approach and the advantages it has over traditional, design bid build or construction management or design build. I mean, there's a whole bunch and he's recommended one and I'm not convinced. So if he's here, I'd love to hear from him.
Through the chair, thank you for allowing me to help with this. My name is Michael Erlanger. I'm an architect and senior project manager with Collier's Project Leaders. To address your question about the progressive design build approach, we are recommending that delivery method. After understanding the size and complexity of this kind of project, what this approach does is allows the owner, being the municipality, the architect / engineer, designer, and the general contractor to participate in the design development, construction documents, throughout the whole process. It also allows at any point during what we call the 4 class estimates, Class D, which we currently have today, which is based on a very conceptual design right now. It allows an exit strategy to happen at any one of those phases, Class D. Class C, which is very conceptual. It's more of a programming phase. Class B, which is design development, which when the architect and engineer are starting to highly develop their design and construction documents. And then Class A, which is almost to the point of final construction documents. This approach generally, I don't want to say eliminates change orders, because if I said that, I would be a magician, but it definitely reduces change orders because it allows the contractor, the general contractor, to have been a participant in the design and the development of the planning up until the project starts and starts construction. So it's more of an interactive, collaborative ability for the entire team to participate. Any questions?
Councillor Parkinson.
Is this a complicated building?
It's not a complicated building in that, that this building, we're not reinventing the wheel, but we do know that in this environment, because of supply chain issues, labor issues, inflation, cost of materials, and all that, we do have to, it generally goes through a process. And what we're trying to do through that process is clearly define the budget as closely as we can up until the project is built. And to do that, you want to bring it's in this case, I think a benefit to bring the general contractor into the mix. I don't think it necessarily relates to the complexity of the building, but it relates to the definition of the budget, the elimination or the reduction of change orders as we get closer to construction.
Again, I suspect if there was a construction manager in the room, they would say that's exactly the services they offer and still allow perhaps more competitive tendering. Am I wrong there?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is certainly another method of delivery. But the progressive design build delivery, the procurement process is becoming much more advantageous to owners, we're finding.
All right. I'll be prepared to move a motion after my colleagues speak.
Yeah, I spent some time looking at this and trying to decide which option I would prefer, and decided that I need to know how we're going to fund it first. And the report, I believe, says that the funding models will come later. But I would like to move that we send this back to staff to return with the funding models, so that we know if we make a decision to proceed with the design, which is a small part of the cost, but it's still a significant amount of money, and you can see it as a certain amount of commitment to going ahead. Also, I spend the money on the design, that if we do that, we at least know what the impact is going to be on future budgets. So that's the motion I'm making. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Do I have a seconder to that motion? Seconded by Councillor Jansen, I'll go with. So that creates a new list. I have I do have a speaking list, so I'm going to keep that record, but I'm going to clear all those names and go to the motion. So does staff wish to comment before I look to council for discussion?
Certainly, during the most recent budget deliberation process, this project was proposed to be financed by way of debt, and that debt was proposed to be funded by way of property taxation. The budget estimates at the time we spoke about, the annual property tax impact was anticipated at approximately a 1% property tax increase once we started servicing the full cost of the debt. Mind you, that was at the budget estimate of 3.3 million. Council, you have before you a number of options. So we certainly could return with updated estimates. The costs of borrowing have increased. This report also highlights the potential for further increases just related to the cost of construction, depending on the year in which we move on this. So to directly answer your question, we have spoken about it during recent budget deliberations based on previous estimates. We certainly could return with the best information we have available today.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Worship. Yes, I remember all this discussion. But what I thought we were also, I was always worried about, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, right? We're just seeing the construction costs. And what I thought we were going to be getting, and you did tell us about the funding model before, but I was hoping to see the estimated costs, you know, the under the iceberg tip, you know, like what are the ongoing operational maintenance costs, you know, to see the whole picture, to see total cost, because that will have an impact on budget. So I think that's why this is only part of the story. And I'd like to see the full story before I would vote in favor of this motion. Thank you.
Can staff comment on Councillor Kobayashi's comment in regards to what he was aspirational for? Is the motion that's before you meeting his needs?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe the motion was speaking specifically, administration's interpretation of the motion is that we would return with the capital costs relative to the borrow and how they might be funded annually through our process. Administration could add to that the operating costs of the building as that moves through time, together with its recapitalization over time.
Do you need a motion? Do I need to amend the motion, or can you just take that as direction?
We can take that as direction, Your Worship.
Thank you. Great. I will go to Councillor Day.
Thank you. In the interest of trying to have the right information come back, when Mr. Russell was speaking to the options that are before us, he talked about kind of the lifespan of each option. And that is not in our report, I don't believe. So I just would like to ask that also come back in the interest of evaluating the cost benefit of the building. I would like to know how long we anticipate the building of that particular size would service the city of Colwood, whether we expect that to be to 2037 or where that would be, because to me 2037 is only 15 years from now, at a cost of somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million. And so I think each lesser option that we might consider should also address how we would do that. And I'm just hoping that, so we're on this process looking to do a progressive design build, but I have never seen a definition of those words, a progressive design build. So I need that to know what we're talking about. It's a building, it's this size, it's a smaller size, or it's an even smaller size. How long does that service us for? And what other option could we follow to make that affordable for Colwood? Is that something that staff could provide with this motion?
Sorry, Your Worship, if I may, so two things that we've attempted to do in this report. One is to indicate an estimation that was done through the master planning last year of the pace at which the public works team will grow over the next 30 years to 2052. And so we've estimated that, and included a link to that material, which you received earlier and directed us to use as a master plan for this document's purpose. And that was the need for building size estimated over 30 years to 2052. The actual lifespan of the building will be substantially longer than that. So if your question is relative to how many years will this expansion allow us to have a building that meets our needs, is one answer. There's a different answer relative to how long we expect that building to last over time.
I guess, and I'm looking for both of those answers, but specifically, how long does this building meet our needs?
We will return with both.
Thank you. Councillor Day, are you done?
I'm just wondering that the last thing that I asked was the definition of progressive design build, because it's not a term I'm familiar with.
Would you like to answer it, or we do have the consultant here? You could answer it. It's up to whoever.
Sorry, perhaps just for 100% clarity, administration is seeking direction to move forward with the building of one of three sizes this evening. The actual procurement methodology would be an administrative decision. We're not seeking for council's assistance in helping us choose construction management or progressive design or bid build. We're just seeking scope of building.
Councillor Baxter. You've already spoken, right, Councillor Perkins? You haven't spoken yet? Then I'm going to switch it. Councillor Perkins and then Baxter.
Thank you, Worship. On the which building should we build, I think we did decide here at this table to proceed with the Public Works building. We had what I thought was excellent work on the sort of site planning for the site here for many years in the future. My sense is at the time we were looking at a budget to fit, and I think it says words to this effect in the report, a budget to build a building to fit what Public Works needs today. And then now with some more thought, they're going, well, gee, maybe we should build it to what they're going to need sometime in the future. And oh, by the way, on the interim, we can use that for some of the overflow from City Hall and perhaps free up some space here, prevent some cramping, maybe even, perhaps a fantasy world, delay the construction of or need for a new City Hall because we have room to grow with this thing here. So yeah, it's going to be painful, however we pay for it. But for me, which building we pick, it should be based on what's the right building, and then we'll have to wrestle with how to pay for it. To build the wrong building because it's less expensive than the right building would not sit well with me, and I hope not with most of council. Yeah, I'm curious to see what it's going to cost and how it's going to pay for, and I suspect that's a bit of a long, convoluted process with many options that we'll have to wrestle with. But I'm quite prepared tonight to move on with the decision on which building to build, which in my humble opinion is that we should build a larger building to allow for growth and overflow, and not insignificantly when we talk of a net zero building. If we're going to build a building that's 1 story now, knowing it needs to be 2 stories at some point, one assumes that a net zero building is going to include solar panels on the roof, in which case let's not have one that changes all that. So for a number of reasons, I believe the larger building is the right building. Yes, it's going to be painful to pay for it, but that doesn't absolve us from the responsibility to provide the proper facilities for our Public Works staff and even our overflow City Hall staff. So I share my colleagues' concern about the costs, and it's going to be a struggle to accommodate those costs without tax increases. But that's, to my mind, a decision for another day. And we'll see what happens on this motion, but otherwise I'd be prepared to we move forward with a larger building. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, you've already spoken, so I'll just speak to this really quickly. I think it's really important that we do understand the funding models. I don't, however, I agree I didn't want to do a double negative. I agree with Councillor Parkinson that I don't think that also limits us. If the motion that's before us this evening passes, I don't think that limits us from still having the discussion on which three of these options could also move forward. So I will be supporting the motion that's in front of us around understanding the funding sources. But as I agree with Councillor Parkinson, I don't think this precludes us from actually doing the work this evening and determining which would be the best option from a building standpoint. Yes, I know it's very strange that I'm agreeing with you. Sorry, Councillor Baxter, you continue to be bumped because I'm going to first time speakers. Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Worship. I concur with many of the comments, and I do want more detail as far as the funding model for this. And I think we all realize that there's some economic pressures out there, and we have some fiscal responsibilities, I think, in this next tax year. So I would like to see what the long-term plan. However, I am keen to support Councillor Parkinson's idea that we move forward with, we pick one option and move forward with that. And for me, that is a no-brainer with the let's build for the future, the larger option.
Councillor, I'm sorry. I would like to finish this motion first, and I kind of let Councillor Parkinson go, and I don't want us to have, because you will have a chance to talk about the actual building and why you can motivate. I will come to you first, I promise.
No, I don't want to now.
Okay. Councillor Baxter, on the motion, please.
Yeah, two quick things. One, just correcting Councillor Parkinson. The report says to build a net zero ready building, not a net zero building. And net zero ready would mean there'd be no solar panels on the roof, amongst other things. But my other question is directed at staff. If you're bringing information on the operating costs of the new building, presumably that would be as compared to the operating costs of the existing buildings.
Yeah, we can bring that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the motion that is before us? Ms. Lalonde, do you have the motion written down? Could you read it one more time for council before I call the vote?
That it be returned with a funding model to proceed with design.
Yeah, okay, great. Seeing no question. Oh, Councillor Parkinson, excuse me, and then Councillor Day.
That it be returned with a funding model to proceed with design. Could you say that? So I think to me, that sounds like it's stalling this until we get a funding model. I'm not sure it's clear. That's by getting a nod from my friend over there that passing this motion isn't asking for the funding model. It's asking to come back with the funding model, and then we'll make a decision on the size of the building.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, so it does preclude it from moving this evening. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Excuse me, Councillor Day.
Yeah, I was trying to determine if the wording of the motion would preclude us from considering phasing the build out of the Public Works building, because it may be possible to build a smaller building, but with the plan for the other half at a later date. And I would just like to keep all options on the table while we come to a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask you to read it one final time, Ms. Lalonde, and then I'm going to call the vote.
That it be returned with a funding model to proceed with design.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jansen. So,
good. I need to know what I'm voting for here, but am I voting for the funding model for the design? Or am I voting for the funding model for the construction? What am I doing here? And I'm
let's go to the mover or the person who made the motion, and hopefully he can be as clear as possible.
The intent of the motion is that before deciding what it is we're going to design, and therefore somewhat committing ourselves to the build, that we get the information on the funding models and all the other information that's been mentioned on operating versus current operating, etc. Because then when we make the decision, we will have a much better idea, if not a perfect idea, of what the impact will be on the city's finances and the tax bills.
Mr. Earl, I see your hand close to the mic button, but I didn't know if that was you actually just fidgeting or, okay, excellent. All right, are you clear, Councillor Jansen? You are, okay, excellent. So are we good now? May I call the question? I will call the question. Those in opposition? Councillors Parkinson and Logan. That motion passes, so that finishes that motion. Unless anyone else wishes to make a motion on 6.3? No? Okay. Moving on then, 7.1. Bylaw number 1921, Land Use Amendment 2353-2361, Soup Road. This is to rescind third reading and third reading as amended. Council, do you need staff to explain why we're rescinding? You do? Okay. Staff?
Thank you, Your Worship. So we are rescinding third reading due to a clerical error. The bylaw that was received first and second reading, or first, second, and third reading back in July included an outdated regulations table. It didn't reflect the report that staff presented to you back in June. And so we've updated the version of the bylaw to reflect the most up-to-date proposal that was considered by council, and we are recommending that the third reading of the bylaw be rescinded and that the updated table be considered for third reading tonight.
Great, thank you. So I will first look for a motion just to rescind. Moved by Councillor Parkinson, second by Councillor Logan. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Now looking for third reading as amended. Moved by Councillor Jansen. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter, Councillor Parkinson. Oh, sorry, your mic. Oh, sorry, I thought you were. Okay, I thought you were discussing. Okay, then I will call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 7.2, bylaw number 1923-01, 5-year financial plan 2022 to 2026. This is amendment schedule A and B. This is for first, second, and third reading. Mover and seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Parkinson, second by Councillor Kobayashi. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 7.3, this is bylaw number 1700-07, official community plan amendment, Royal Beach. This is for second, third reading, and then I'll look for another motion on adoption. So this is for this is for second and third reading right now. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Oh, sorry, yeah, Councillor Day.
Sorry, I believe that should there not be a report of the public hearing before we move on to the other readings?
I will go to staff.
Thank you, Your Worship. So a written report of public hearing containing a summary of the nature of representations respecting the bylaw that were made must be prepared and maintained for public record, but it doesn't necessarily have to be at this meeting. Unfortunately, we had the meeting on Thursday night, so for the time to get it on this agenda was not able to be happening.
Councillor Dave, anything else on that?
Sorry, I believe the public hearing is still valid and important. There were a number of written submissions. There were a number of in-person submissions. All of the in-person submissions here last Thursday were in opposition. So I just think it's important that that be noted, that the residents came out and they spoke. And While there were a few emails received in support, not very detailed, there were a lot of very detailed opinions expressed by the community in opposition. I think that's important because this is a democracy where people's, not just their votes on election day, but their opinions throughout the year matter. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm still looking for a mover and seconder for second and third reading for bylaw number 1700-07. Moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Logan. Discussion. Oh, Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I do have a few comments after the public hearing the other day. And I prepared a few things, if you bear with me for a moment. At the last meeting on September 22nd, the public hearing for this 7.3 that's before us tonight, it was publicly brought up that I had accepted donations for my 2018 campaign from individuals associated to the development community, and specifically this development. I publicly declared that, and I did take donations to support my 2018 election campaign from an individual who is associated to the major landowner in our community and is the developer for Royal Beach. In fairness, at that time, I wished to be self-funded for my candidacy, but I quickly found out that you could only contribute $1,200 to your own campaign, and that these endeavors actually cost much more than $1,200. As a new council candidate, I spoke with other members of council and discussed campaign contributions and sources of funding. Having to seek funding for my campaign became a necessity and something that I hadn't initially contemplated as I headed down this particular road. Accepting a campaign contribution to support my initiative in advance of ever making any decisions about this project that's here before us today. I'm not aware of any rules or laws that inhibits this or prohibits this. And I found that this is actually a common practice amongst Colwood council members of the past and others across the region. I publicly and ethically disclose this information, which is required according to the Campaign Finance Act of British Columbia. This was my ethical responsibility, something that is important to me and remains so today. Accepting this small amount of money to support my candidacy has had no bearing whatsoever on any decision that I've made on behalf of this community. To infer anything else is wrong, and it's unfortunate that some people take the view that this may inhibit me from making a competent decision on behalf of all of us. I stand for homes for people in our community. I stand for progress for the city of Colwood. I stand for measured development that makes sense for us as a community. I also stand for inclusivity and ensuring that Colwood is for everyone and not just those that happen to be lucky enough to move here a long time ago, like myself. It's important to me that we provide a variety of housing stock for the diversity of people moving to our community. This includes condos, townhomes, single family lots, rental opportunities, gentle infill, take your pick. That we welcome all people to this community in all forms and all kinds of living situations is important to me. And we were welcomed here as a family many years ago, and that I want to make sure that we're extending that same welcome mat to people that come from elsewhere to here and choose us as a community. When I was first elected, Mr. Mayor, you made some comments to me that resonated, and it was actually the night of us getting sworn in. You turned to me and you said, and I'll quote this the best I possibly can as I recollect, you are now responsible for those that live here, but also that those that may choose to live here in the future. And that's something that resonated with me at that time and still does today. This Royal Beach proposal and this development ticks many boxes that are important to me, that I feel are important to this community. What I believe is that we are required to have an ability to connect with significant landowners in our community, the ability to discuss issues, bring forward ideas, and advocate on behalf of the community with our major landowners. I don't believe that the interests of this community are served through acrimony and divisiveness with our landowners and our builders. This builder and builders like them will be building in our community for decades, and we must have the ability to communicate freely and represent the community's interests. It's about relationship building. These are people that built our very homes and have grown our community to what it is today. Some of these landowners are even traditional families that have helped build out our community for many years, something for which I'm personally thankful. Unless you built your home with your own two hands, we should all have some gratitude for the builders that have come forward and taken a risk in our community to make it what it is today. In conclusion, I will not recuse myself from these decisions, as I believe that would be abdicating my responsibility. I do not believe that that would serve the interests of this community. It's unfortunate that some people take the position that I shouldn't participate in these decisions for some of these reasons that I've outlined. I have no control over how people feel about me or about this situation, but I own my decisions and I publicly declare them, as I did at the time in 2018 when I disclosed my financial disclosure documents. It's not my understanding that there is any statutory requirement nor any case law or any ruling that requires me to take a step back from these decisions. Nor do I feel that it's my moral or ethical responsibility or that I've been compromised in some form or another. I know in my heart of hearts that I have the best interests of this community at large in my heart, and I will continue to do so as my primary responsibility for the rest of this current term, and if fortunate enough, into the next term as well. And really, that's all I have to say. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Jansen. Councillor Parkinson.
Well said, Dean. On the Royal Beach rezoning, I have a number of thoughts. I was out there on the weekend walking through the park and thinking, you know, what a great corporate citizen to have built that park at the beach and let us use it and maintain it. And it's a great addition to our community and probably highlights what the whole project is going to be like. What's formally in front of us is a minor change in boundaries between areas here and there, which frankly, none of us could have drawn those boundaries anywhere close to where they were before. None of us will be able to draw them close afterwards. You know, that it's not very significant. I do note that they have recognized the impact of inflation on the CACs and other fees that they're being asked to contribute to our community, and I acknowledge that is a step. On the other hand, I really didn't appreciate sitting here last week getting a lot of flack from a lot of upset residents about potential relocation of towers within the development. You know, and not to my mind, they made commitments on where those towers were going to be placed. Maybe they weren't as firm as I took them to be. I think they were publicly made, and if they wish to choose them, or if they've evolved in their thinking and have a better idea, that it's incumbent on them to come forward and say, we said this then, and now we're saying this, and here's why we're changing our mind, and why we think it's a better solution. And it may well be, and I'm happy to listen and have that discussion with them. You know, they spent a year working on this plan. Not sure where it is or what it says or what else has evolved. We're waiting on a parks plan that is sort of, I think, near and dear to all of us. You know, there's been talk of very significant parks down there, but it hasn't come to this council yet. And I think it's sort of, if not overdue, certainly very near the time when it was committed for. So that's a concern. And then, you know what, at the end of the day, I look at the community amenity charges and you know, they've got a point that there was an agreement made before that were different numbers. Yet when we go back and looked during the year at our community amenity charges, we decided that they were out of whack. You know, we look at the facilities for this community as it grows. So, you know, we talked tonight about the public works building. We know that the police are looking for larger and better quarters. We know that the demands on the recreation facilities within our community are sort of, you know.
Certainly. Go ahead and state what your point of order is. We're on Royal Beach. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Sorry, Councillor Baxter. Thank you. I need to turn your mic on.
Yeah, and I believe the discussion about the amenity charges is in a different part of the agenda.
Could well be, but I think I'm talking about my position on the rezoning as a whole, and I'm just about to wrap up. So maybe you'll let me just finish.
Yeah, let's give them.
Again, if community amenity charges are lesser in one project, are they greater in other projects, or are they greater for the community as a whole? I understand that what we're talking about at present is we put in some interim CACs while we take some time to determine what they should be. But I think that I have trouble sort of saying, okay, let's give you this rezoning without addressing the CACs and bringing them in line with the rest of the community. So that's my position, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, then Kobayashi.
So at the public hearing, we were asked to explain our criteria for making these types of decisions. And we were asked to explain why we make this decision. And those are very reasonable and sensible things to ask. And I've often done just that. But of course, most of the people who spoke on Thursday rarely come to council and rarely listen online. So they're not aware of that. And I completely understand that. Everybody has so many other things in their lives. Only we have to come every week. So as to my criterion, one thing that I don't use as a criteria, or certainly not an overriding criteria, is how many people turn up to the public hearing and how many are for or against. There are more than 17,000 people in Colwood. If we made decisions based on just on the presence of 50 or 100 or even 300 people in the room, we would be ignoring the opinions and the needs of 99% of the population. How do we know their needs and opinions? We don't. Nobody does. And that's one of the difficulties of sitting here making the decision. Anyone who says they do know the opinion of the entire community is blowing smoke. Everyone forms an impression of what the majority thinks based on their own sets of contacts with people, but nobody really knows. Count up the number of people any of us talk to on these issues during a year, and you'll find it's a very small percentage of the population, and it's not representative, but skewed towards people in our neighborhood or with similar habits and hobbies, or who we happen to talk to in the course of business. So I would say my decisions are made on the basis of what I can best work out is in the best interest of the present and future of the community of Colwood, informed by listening to anyone who wants to talk about it, but not ruled by that. And you may disagree with what I think. You might even laugh at it, but that's quite normal. It's extremely rare to find an issue on which everyone would agree. So you asked if we listen, and yes, we do listen. And I heard the following issues at the public hearing: views, building heights, density, safety and convenience, traffic, including light versus traffic circle, sewers, drainage, how it will help the vision, changing the OCP, roads not done yet, what we want to, not what the developer wants. I listened and I made notes, and then I listened again to the video, made more notes. But I also read the bylaw. The bylaw has absolutely no effect on any of these issues, not one iota of effect. The bylaw is a minor change to a few lines surrounding development areas. We gave first reading to this bylaw on August 29th. The wording of this bylaw has been available for more than a month. And I don't expect the public to follow all of the steps in the process. But if you're on council, you should be following all the steps in the process. So the reason for the boundary changes are to facilitate a relatively minor but still significant change to the road pattern, which increases safety. So this extremely minor amendment, which makes us a contribution to road safety, why would I vote against it? Why would I vote against road safety? It doesn't make any sense. But what about all the other things that people are concerned about? That list I just read out. How we deal with this bylaw is not going to help that. But that doesn't mean these issues can't be tackled. Councillor Parkinson mentioned the possibility of actually controlling building heights. And so I'd like to just mention that I'm prepared to put a proposal forward that staff should return to council with a report on the potential for a separate OCP or land use bylaw amendment to control the location of buildings greater than 4 stories in Royal Beach Development Area 6, so that they follow the land form of Machosen Road. Now, I'm not making that motion right now. I'm just saying I'm prepared to do that after we've dealt with this bylaw. That's my comments on the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi, Dave, and Logan.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'll agree somewhat with some of your comments, Councillor Baxter, but the bottom line here is, I'm not arguing the resizing of the zones or anything. That's, it is a minor issue to me. After looking it over really carefully, even the intersections, it's smarter to have the 4-way intersections, all smarter stuff, right? Everything was smarter. I guess this is where I'm having problems, and the answer wasn't sufficient enough for me. And this is why I voted against it, for one sole reason. And that sole reason was, I remember attending quite a few of when we were first doing that whole Royal Beach development there. And the way that the citizens sort of bought into this, I mean, there was cries about density and everything like that. And I realized that there is no change in density, blah, 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 blah right now. But the big issue I have was that, and it made me feel really good, because I love that panoramic view. We have this beautiful, this is Colwood, that beachfront. And when we first saw, I understand these are renderings. I do understand that, but we were actually briefed on that the towers would be as far close to those northern cliffs, and it wasn't going to change the panoramic view. I mean, and that sold me on it, to tell you the truth. It really did, because when you go down there, it's breathtaking. It absolutely is breathtaking. Smart. And I can sort of vision what was going to happen there. Not too clear, because not all the details are worked out. So why I got a little disturbed by it, I mean, the response was, it was probably the right response, which was when I asked the question, why did we move the buildings? And the response was geotechnical reasons. I mean, I can't even spell that, but I know that there's something to that. I wasn't too sure what that meant. But to me, a further explanation of what that means, why, what are these geotechnical reasons? We never got explanation. It was, the documents weren't public. I don't know if there's something that they hold on to themselves, the closely guarded secrets, I don't know. But I just had problems with that. It just hit me the wrong way. And so, and it's that reason, probably is the major sole reason that I just couldn't agree with this, because I looked at the process. After we zone this, we're not part of the DP process, right? We're not. We as a council are not. So when do we get to interject again? When do we get to say, whoa, that's not what we visioned? But I'm not sure. So, that's why I voted against it. And that's why I continue. I mean, if someone can answer that question to me, and give me the reasonable response, I'm in. But that's where I sit right now. Thanks so much.
Councillor Day, then Logan.
So lots of good discussion, and that is a good thing. It is the last opportunity that council has to get this right. And I would disagree with some things that have been brought up, including that whether you're for or against the process not being important. Because I've been involved in the processes here in Colwood for way too long. But what has happened is that it's been long enough that when I was in the audience making comments about the master development agreement for the 2,800 homes that there were to go into all of Royal Bay, and I phoned everybody in Colwood to tell them about the deficiencies that I found in the planning documents, that the hydro poles were being placed in the middle of the sidewalks, that the trees were being cut down, that the issues that I found to be problematic in my neighborhood. And I stood up for that, and I came and I spoke about it. And eventually I ran for council. And when that master development agreement community was built, many of the people that are here speaking today now live there. And when I walk in that community, they are thankful for a number of the things that me and many other residents in Colwood lobbied to have: boulevards, street trees, sidewalks, park benches, parks, all part of what the community asked for as a whole. And maybe in my small part was to say, hey, you guys need to pay attention. You need to come say something. So it's really important to me, very important to me, that people are heard and are seen to be heard. Because if you don't feel like what you say makes a difference, after a while you go away. So I'm really glad that people came out to say what their problems are. And this is the only chance that we have. And the developer did not answer any of those questions. And they did not share the geotechnical report that was the basis for their request. And it leaves me concerned that I have no further control, that the building may be moving to a place where it couldn't have been put before this change was made. And without the transparent, open dialogue to say, okay, we heard your concerns and here's the answers, I'm still not willing to vote for this, because it is my last opportunity to say, no, we need something more. And it's not because I want to deny anybody the ability to come here. And it's not because I don't hear what people need in terms of housing and apartments and rentals and townhouses, and every kind of property is welcome, but not at any cost. So I will not be supporting it, because the developer heard what the people said too, and they haven't answered either. Thank you.
Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Your Worship. First, I do want to say thank you to Councillor Jansen for a statement at the beginning of the meeting. I think he was bang on, and it was unfortunate that those statements were made last week that aren't supported in my estimation. So I appreciate you being vocal about that. And I do, I do acknowledge that, yeah, there was a lot of discussion and opposition during the public hearing. But that opposition, while, and the comments were, valid, but they had to do with a land use decision that's already been made. So it's, and that's not to say that the developer is not and should not be held accountable for some commitments that they've made in the past. However, it is this table's obligation to separate the wheat from the chaff and understand what the true the true intent of the change is. The change is not a change in land use. That's been decided. This is, as Councillor Parkinson had said, it's a relatively minor that deals with road design and layout. That, in my estimation, staff supports this, I think, benefits that area of Colwood. So why wouldn't we support that? So and you know what, I will say, a very wise person said to me that listening is incredibly important. Unfortunately, listening doesn't mean unconditional agreement. And again, that means we need to separate the wheat from the chaff, acknowledge what was said on Thursday, but understand what the true intent was. And there's a difference between the popular decision and the right decision, and those that are running that will get on the council that don't presently serve will have to come to that reckoning. Not every decision is a very popular decision. They're hard. And so I too think that it's a positive change that makes sense. It's relatively minor. Again, the developer has some work to do with the community to bring some reassurance and justify placement of those towers. But in this, we're talking about road layout, pure and simple, and I will be supporting bylaw.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, you've already spoken once, so I'm going to speak and then I'll come to you. For myself, this is clearly a housekeeping item about realigning the roads in Royal Beach. This isn't about density, and this isn't about where the buildings are being eventually placed. During this election period, it's become clear to me that there are candidates that appear to be not supporting growth in our community. And I want to draw attention to Colwood voters that this is exactly how you stall growth. Our OCP has been positioned as a pro-growth. Our OCP has been positioned as a pro-growth. It's interesting how you guys are quiet for your candidate, but you don't seem to be as respectful to me. So thank you. Well, no, it's not my opportunity because you're speaking. And this is a council meeting, not an audience. I am allowed to say my words, thank you. Our OCP has been positioned as a pro-growth OCP. Voting against this bylaw this evening is the playbook on how you slow growth and progress here in Colwood. Councillor Baxter.
So, Councillor Kobayashi, I'm a bit baffled by what you said. You're concerned about the movement of the buildings, as I am, as most people are. And I've already spoken to that and put forward a solution. Your solution appears to be to vote against this bylaw, which has no effect on the position of the building. The position of the buildings currently is not controlled by any bylaw and will not be changed by this bylaw. If you want to control the position of the buildings, you have to take some initiative and actually propose something that would bring about the control of the position of the buildings. Councillor Parkinson has put one idea forward, and I have put another idea forward, which I'm going to read again. I propose that staff should return to council with a report on the potential for a separate OCP or land use bylaw amendment to control the location of buildings of greater than 4 stories in the Royal Beach Development Area 6. So they follow the land form of the chosen road. So since that is what you want, I assume that you'll support that when I put it forward. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands. So I will call the question. This is for second and third reading. Those in opposition. Councillors Day and Kobayashi. Oh, excuse me, and Parkinson. My apologies. Before I go to adoption, I'll look to your motion. You said you had a motion, or would you like to do it after adoption? So you know what? Let's do adoption first, and then we'll do it. So I'm looking for a mover and seconder for adoption. Moved by Councillor Logan, second by Councillor Baxter. Discussion. Councillor Day. Oh, you hit your button. No. Okay. So I'll call the question then. Those in opposition. Councillors Day. Councillor Day. Oh, and Parkinson, excuse me, and Kobayashi. Okay, now I will go to Councillor Baxter. Excuse me, there you go.
Sorry. I move that staff come back to council with a report on the potential for a separate OCP or land use bylaw amendment to control the location of buildings of greater than 4 stories in Royal Beach Development Area 6, so that they follow the land form of Machosen Road.
A seconder. Second by Councillor Jansen. Discussion. Councillor Day.
Could staff comment on whether or not that's possible?
So we could come back with design guidelines, a design guideline that speaks to that intent that we can add to the Royal Bay, I guess, the sub-area plan for Royal Beach. We can rezone someone's land without their consent. So like a rezoning initiated by the city would have to be expansive and target not just one property owner, but along the whole stretch of Machosen, but we can definitely come back with an OCP amendment, an amendment to our own policy to better guide development along that frontage.
But that means that it's the horse is already out of the barn here, is it not?
I mean, it did. The allocation of height for apartment buildings in Area 6 happened in 2020. So these rezoning and OCP amendment tonight has no bearing on the already enabled 12 stories that could take place anywhere within the Area 6, the way the zone is written.
Correct, but the amendments to that map for Area 6 that were just made at this table allow that tall building to be perhaps in a different place now than it was before, correct?
Margin, like no, not along that stretch. Like the boundary changes of Area 6 are not specific to that corner of Latoria and Machosen. So the Area 6 is not changing at that particular location. The changes on the line is further down towards the north.
Yeah, towards the headlands.
Yeah.
So it does change the location of the building though. Even though those changes on the map were minor, it permits the building to be anywhere in Area 6, which now Area 6 is changed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Baxter.
First of all, I want to point out that the buildings are already allowed anywhere in Area 6. And the change to Area 6 doesn't affect the location of the buildings. Nothing in the bylaw discusses or controls change of building, location of the tall buildings. But I would also like to check with Chief Administration Officer. It was just said that we can't rezone land without the owner's permission, but I've been part of a municipality that did that. Did we break the law?
Should this motion pass this evening, administration will be happy to return with options that achieve the intent of what you're seeking. And we could explore as one of those options, a rezoning against an owner's desire and walk council through the risks involved.
Yes, I'm aware of the risk. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 7.4. This is bylaw number 1951, land use amendment, Royal Beach. This is for second and third reading and then adoption. May I get a mover for second and third? Moved by Councillor Parkinson, second by Councillor Logan. Discussion? I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Oh, Councillor Day.
Sorry, you're just going a little fast for me. I'm trying to determine exactly where we are on the agenda here.
7.4.
7.4. So this is the land use bylaw amendment.
Correct. Bylaw number 1951, land use amendment CD 30, Royal Beach for second and third reading and then
Okay.
adoption.
So I would just like to ask staff if there is any potential to make changes to this bylaw that would impact the previous issues that we were just talking about with the previous OCP amendment.
So just to confirm, you're asking, is there any changes to the rezoning amendment application, like that would change the outcome in terms of height and location of apartment buildings in area 6? No. So effectively, the bylaw that is in front of you tonight is asking for permission to replace the map in the CD 30 zone. And then it's asking for changes to the CAC, the one sentence in the bylaw that speaks to CACs, but there's nothing that impacts height.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Baxter.
I'm not seeing in the bylaw a reference to CACs. The bylaw in front of me. Bylaw 1951.
That's correct. My apologies. So we do have a staff report that was included with the agenda, actualizing the offer that the developer had made during the public hearing about indexing community amenity contributions to annual CPI increases in the Greater Victoria area. So that would be an amendment if council makes that motion that is included in the staff report. So we would need a resolution from council accepting that offer. And the recommendation is, I believe it is listed at 7.4. So the recommendation is that the bylaw before you tonight be amended to incorporate an annual consumer price index increase to all applicable community amenity contributions under section 10.35.4.2 of the Colwood Land Use Bylaw 151. So that's the recommendation in the staff report. That is what we would need to further amend that bylaw and accept that indexed CAC contribution.
So we have the recommendation and we have the bylaw. Does it matter which order we pass them in?
I think we would prefer that you do a recommendation based on the staff report and then do readings as amended if council were to accept the offer.
Do we have anything on the table right now?
We do. So we'll need to Mr. Long, can I just table that and then deal with the recommendation, or how would I have that removed?
Yes, please.
I can table it. Okay.
Yes.
Do I need a motion to table?
You can just leave it outstanding right now because you have just a mover and seconder. You didn't take a vote on it and go back to the original first motion about the incorporating this.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Yeah. So we'll just we'll say that second and third reading presently is tabled, and we'll deal with the recommendation, and I'll look to You're moving it? Okay. So, and it's seconded by, it is moved by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Jansen. I will go with, are you still looking to speak? No. Councillor Parkinson.
Apologies, Your Worship and everybody else. I believed I was moving the recommendation to accept their offer to increase the fees, which I believe is what we're on now.
Yes.
But I was not going to move the motion to
for a second
for
and
the
third reading.
bylaw. So anyhow.
Okay, no, that's fine then. So let's say that was my error, and the mover and seconder moved the recommendation, not the actual bylaw. So could we just clean it up that way? And we'll just say it so that it's Councillor Parkinson and Jansen who have moved the recommendation, and I have no motion presently for second and third reading. Okay, as long as everybody at this table is comfortable with that. Good. Is there discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. So that motion becomes part of the bylaw, correct? No? Okay. So now I'm looking for second and third reading. I may get a mover and seconder. Councillor Parkinson.
As amended.
As amended, thank you. Councillor Logan, do I have a seconder? Second by Councillor Kobayashi. Discussion, excuse me. Councillor Baxter.
Can I just ask Councillor Parkinson why he doesn't want to pass this bylaw?
Councillor Parkinson.
I gave quite a long-winded spiel to the last one that you gave me heck for, sir. So again, to me, it really comes down to the community amenity charges. That if we accept a rezoning without leveling the community amenity charges across the community, then the costs are borne elsewhere, and I don't believe that's appropriate.
Councillor Baxter, I'm not looking for a discussion to go back and forth. So if you have comments, I'm looking for comments, but I'm not looking for a discussion between you and Councillor Parkinson.
I think it's important for Councillor Parkinson to realize he just moved an amendment to the bylaw, which was passed to increase the CACs. And now if we pass this bylaw, the CACs are increased, which I believe is what you wanted.
Okay, Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be quick. Yes, they've agreed to increase CACs by the amount of inflation going forward. And I support that. I think that's good of them. However, they haven't agreed to increase them to the level that we've been asking other proponents to pay as being reasonable. So I believe that's where they should end up. But I do recognize that they have made movement and they made it in the right direction, and good for them.
Thank you. Anyone else looking to speak? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition to second and third reading. Councillor Day and Councillor Parkinson oppose, and Councillor Kobayashi oppose. Now we will move to adoption. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Jansen, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, Councillor Parkinson, Councillor Kobayashi, Councillor Day. Moving on to 7.5, 1700-06, official community plan amendment for Olympic View local area. This is for third reading, and then we'll do adoption. And I just want to be clarification that the letter that was attached to 7.5 was amended off of that one, so it's not part of that file. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. After reviewing my 2018 contributions, it's publicly declared. I had a couple $100 contribution by the proponent, and in lieu of this, it is just my own ethics. It's my own decision that there's a potential perceived conflict of interest, and I would like to recuse myself, please.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions with the confusion with the report. Does Olympic View contribute to the Fire Hall Fund? And I thought I saw a map that showed the potential rezoning here to include what I thought were a couple of houses that weren't part of it. So I don't know if we can bring up the map to have a look, or if that's changed beyond the two sites that we had talked about before, or if it's just the two sites that we talked about before.
So the amending by law tonight, so the changes that are being made to the official community plan, they are replacing the local area plan in the official community plan, and they are coloring the two lots that we've been speaking about. So the lot on Olympian and Medalist, those, they are going to be colored, coded to enable apartment buildings. So the apartment buildings will be reflected in the local area plan. Then the amendment to the CD2 zone, which is the amendment to the land use bylaw, that one is an increase to the number of dwelling units that can be built throughout Olympic View. So they are not specific to these two properties, but it is through the local area plan that we are enabling the apartment building location. So it's the combined OCP amendment and amendments to the city zone that create that enablement for apartments. But the density, it's also an overall increase to the number of dwelling units that could be built in the Olympic View lands.
Thank you. That's very clear. But because the original agenda came out with the wrong report that sort of referenced Royal Beach, I'm unclear whether fire hall contributions are part of what's being adjusted according to inflation, or if they even make contributions to the fire hall.
Yes, so the amending bylaw to the CD2 zone. So the existing CD2 zone does not include a fire hall fund, but with this amendment, we will be incorporating a fire hall fund, and the increase, the annual increase based on CPI will be applied to the fire hall fund as well as the community amenity contributions. Yes.
Thank you. And is that part of what we're doing tonight?
Yes, that is.
Which part? Sorry, I'm just.
The amendment to the land use bylaw. So that's bylaw 19.
Thank you.
Your worship, if I may.
1924.
I believe,
Please go ahead.
I believe you're currently on 7.5.
Yes, we are.
Within 7.6, there was a recommendation from staff to make the changes that Ms. Hernandez just suggested in your agenda.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Right, we were waiting for you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So as I was trying to make sense of what each item on our agenda does or does not do, I was prompted to look back at our previous packages about the heights of the buildings to just assure myself that we were consistent with what we had said before. And if my recollection and my research was correct, the Olympian Way was a taller building than Medalist Avenue. I think one is 8 stories and one is 10 stories. But when I looked at the actual heights included, area 1 heights is 12 meters or 4 stories. And area 4 was height 25 meters, which I would guess was 10 stories. So I'm just trying to be clear how that's reflected in the official community plan.
So the height of the stories is not, I mean, we're also making an amendment to a section of the official community plan, which is under the neighborhood center designation. So there's a sentence in the amending bylaw to the OCP that outlines consideration will be given to buildings, I believe up to 7 stories. It's been a while since that bylaw has been drafted. But the tallest building is going to be 7 stories, and the other building off of Medalist is 5 stories. So 5 and 7, and area 4 of the CD2 zone has been created to enable a maximum, which is the maximum needs to reflect the maximum height of the 7 stories. But that doesn't mean that both could be 7 stories, but we know the proposal here is 5 stories on Medalist and 7 stories on Olympian Way.
And so you're saying that the OCP doesn't define that, the zoning does? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So the official community plan, when we went through the lengthy process of gathering public input, considered, you know, what the zoning was for the people who live next door. So I just want to be very clear in saying that I'm not supporting this OCP amendment because the people who live next door live in a 4-story building. And the building that's proposed to be either 5 or 7 stories tall, which perhaps might be taller based on what you've said here, is now going to be on a rock overlooking them. So that is the crux of the issue that I hear from residents repeatedly about. When we built our OCP, we tried to assure our residents that as we facilitated gentle infill development, we would not adversely impact the residents who already live here. So my vote in opposition to the OCP amendment here tonight is specifically about that. Thank you.
Okay, it doesn't look like there's anybody else. I will speak to the motion. First of all, I will disclose as well. I received a $200 donation from this developer 4 years ago. I am not excluding myself from this meeting, and for the exact same reasons that Councillor Jansen outlined in the last one. I also want to explain the difficulty with what Councillor Kobayashi has just done. Councillor Kobayashi has just excluded himself from any decision in the next 4 years in regards to Olympic View. He will have no say. People can say he doesn't, but you need to have a lawyer to say that you are no longer in a conflict of interest. And I'm not sure, once you've said that you believe you are in a conflict of interest because you took money from a developer, I'm not sure how you get out of it. Councillor Kobayashi may be able to, but I am, thank you. I have every right to speak as my chair. Are you a lawyer? Speak out again, Mr. English. I'll ask you to leave. I will, I'm done. I will call the question if there's no other discussion. Seeing none, those in opposition. Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to, that was for third reading. So now we need to move to adoption. Do I have a motion to adopt? Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Jansen. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition. Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to, should we bring him back in and then he can declare again? We are now on 7.6, bylaw number 1924, land use amendment for 3601 Olympian Way and 640 Medalist Way. Third reading and adoption. Do you wish to declare conflict again? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I not on 7.6? Oh, I thought it was doing 7.5. My apologies. Did we not? Did we finish 7.5 and then finish 7.6?
We just finished 7.5. We're about to do 7.6, and there is a first motion about the CACs.
Yeah. So Councillor Kobayashi, you need to declare another conflict of interest if you wish. We're on 7.6. It's bylaw number 1924, land use amendment 3601 Olympian Way and 640 Medalist Way. Councillor Kobayashi, are you comfortable with us moving forward, or are you declaring a conflict? I'm sorry, okay, so you're not declaring a conflict of interest. Okay. Then I am looking for, sorry, there's a recommendation first. The staff wish to speak to the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can speak to the recommendation. So this is the staff are recommending that the proposed bylaw be amended to incorporate the annual consumer price index increase to all applicable community amenity contributions. As it's currently written, the CPI increase only applies to the fire hall fund, but not to the affordable housing fund or the community amenity fund. So we are recommending that bylaw 1924 be amended to include an annual CPI increase to those, to all the community amenity contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a mover and seconder to the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Jansen. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 7 points. Oh no, I'm sorry. We still got to do third reading and adoption. So this is now for third reading for bylaw number 1924, land use. May I get a mover and seconder for third? Moved by Councillor Parkinson, second by Councillor Logan. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Now we are on adoption. May I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Jansen, second by Councillor Logan. Discussion? Seeing none, those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Now we're on 7.7, bylaw number 1946, land use amendment 1752 Island Highway. This is for adoption. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Kobayashi. Councillor Day.
Sorry, just a point of clarification. I misunderstood what vote you were calling, and I would like to be in favor of the CPI increase, but opposed to the bylaw, is what my intention coming here tonight was. It doesn't really change the outcome, but that's what I was trying to do. Thank you. On 7.6.
Yeah, I will ensure that that's recorded that way. So we're on 7.7 for adoption. Discussion? Seeing none. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. 7.8 sewer LES enlargement bylaw. This is for first, second, and third reading. We can group this. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Jansen. Is there discussion? Councillor Day.
Thank you. I would just like to ask staff the question. So the sewer enlargement for Winthrop Road, the sewer main was carried a block further south from Winthrop. I'd like to know what the reason was and who is paying.
Administration will need to return with that.
Thank you. That's satisfactory.
Thank you. So any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 7.9, bylaw number 1956, land use amendment to 2022 Omnibus amendments for first, second, and third reading. Moved by Councillor Logan, second by Councillor. Well, I had Parkinson. You keep throwing me off there by pointing the opposite direction. All right, is there any discussion? Councillor Day.
Thank you. When I was reviewing the omnibus amendments, there are some places where the amendments are very clear as to what they're replacing and some areas where they're not. Could we please get a description of why that is the case?
Thank you, Councillor Day, through the chair. Could you please clarify which sections are clear and which ones aren't?
Well, there are some places where text is simply inserted, and there are some places where text is replacing other text. So where the text is simply inserted, is there any explanation as to why it's been inserted?
Thank you. Yes, so I think, for example, in the definition section, there might be new definitions that are included where there wasn't a definition before, so those were inserted. In other cases where things were replaced, it's because we had council direction to, for example, when bylaw 1909 was adopted, some of the regulations or some of the like section headers were thrown off, and so rather than so we've just replaced where it used to reference the section 2 of the land use bylaw, it now references bylaw 1909. So it depends on what the motions were prior to. Not sure if that answers your question at all. Sorry.
Well, thank you for that. I just suggest that when we're having amendments like this, where we're somewhat at a disadvantage, we don't have any running document that shows what's been approved or not been approved or been desired to be changed. In future, I think it would help to have the original bylaw and the amended bylaw so that we could tell where the changes are. I'm just finding it very difficult to follow.
So when these amending bylaw came forward to council, there was a staff report that walked through every single amendment and where was the authority to make that amendment. Most of the amendments tonight are because we're cleaning up or acting on the direction of a previous council resolution to look into fixing some of the discrepancies in the bylaw. I believe the date for Desiree's initial council report may have been July 11. She may be better able, but it was when we first introduced this bylaw, there was a staff report that explained in detail what each amendment was made for.
Well, that's not my recollection. So we did have a report, but it was miscellaneous changes. That was the description that we had and housekeeping. So I just would like to be able to follow that more closely in the future. Thank you.
Mr. O.
Thank you, Your Worship. When this bylaw returns for further consideration, administration will bring forward the original report together with a red line version to make it easier to consume.
Excuse me. Thank you. I'm sorry, I haven't been marking them all off. Sorry, we are on bylaw 7079, correct? 7.9, thank you. So this is still for first, second, third reading. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 710, this is bylaw number 1957, council remuneration for adoption. Do I have a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Logan, seconded by Councillor Jansen. Discussion. Councillor Day, then Kobayashi, then Baxter, then Parkinson.
Thank you. You know, it's always dangerous when you find yourself on the same side as people you've never been on the same side with before. But seriously, the grumpy taxpayers are sending out notices to taxpayers all over saying, question your council carefully during this election on these issues. And for the first time in a very long time, I find myself on the same page because everyone in our community, whether you're young or you're old or you're able or you're not so able some days, is struggling. We're struggling with supply chain issues, inflation, the cost of living, mortgage rates. Everybody is struggling. And of all the people who contribute to what happens here in Colwood, council, I often thought, should be paid better. When I started, I got $600 a month. And I'm about double that now, 20 years later. So yes, I absolutely do understand the financial pressures for members of council, and talked to many people who wanted to run, but either found financially that difficult or time budget wise difficult. But this is too much and too fast. So I agree with some sort of gentle, gradual, continuous improvement in that. Not for myself, but for the people who can't be here without it. I'm very lucky, and I'm not wealthy. I'm just lucky. So my vote will be against. So thank you.
Councillor Kobayashi, Baxter, then Parkinson.
Thank you very much. I just, I think I flogged this horse to death, to tell you the truth, but I guess I have one request, a solution maybe to all this right now. And my suggestion is, and I don't know how we can time this in, but I would certainly love to have the committee here. And so we can question, how they got there, the philosophy. I did to take the time out to talk to the chair of the committee. That was one. And, I was probably on par about the process and how they got there. But it certainly would be good for the rest of the council and the public to hear it. And I think it's a reasonable request. So you can make the decision on this. So that's a solution out of this right now, and I make that request. Thank you.
Councillor Baxter, then Parkinson.
I note that you make the request, but not a motion, which again, I find baffling. I don't know why you wouldn't make a motion, but I would object to having the committee here. The committee volunteered to do a job. They didn't volunteer to sit here in this chamber in front of the jeering section. And we volunteered for that. We volunteered to sit here and to put up with the attacks that seem to be inevitable on government. But I don't think the committee did, and I don't think it would be fair to do that to them. If anybody wants to know how they considered the matter, then they can look at the videos of the meetings of the committee. They're on the website, and you can follow exactly how their thought process went. But I wanted to say that the increase proposed, which I will never see because I'm not running it again, but which I will have to pay for, like everybody else, is going to cost my household, I figure, $15 or less. And given that there's only about 1 in 10,000 sorry, 1 in 1,000 people in the community are prepared to do this job. And given that I'm stepping down, and some of you folks who are stepping up are going to have to do the job, I'm more than happy to give you an extra $15 a year out of my pocket to take over this job, which is a lot of work. And I'd pay twice that much to be rid of the job and give it to you. But having said that, I'm going to go back just to try and keep the peace a bit. I'm going to go back to what I proposed in the first place, which is that this be phased in over 4 years. So my proposal is that we amend the bylaw to include a 4-year phase in starting in January 1st, 2023 and ending after the 4th year. 4-year phase in of this increase. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Parkinson next.
I was seconding.
Oh, sorry, I've given you the mic. You've now seconded it. Okay, so then we'll, I will, hold on, I just got to record. Okay, I will, we'll go to the motion then. Discussion on the motion. No discussion. Okay, I will call the question. Those in opposition. Councillor Jansen, Councillor Parkins, excuse me, Councillor Logan and Mayor Martin and Councillor Kobayashi. That motion fails. So that brings us back to, did you, Councillor Parkinson, you wishes to speak, and then it'll be Jansen.
Thank you, Your Worship. As my colleague, Mr. Baxter, I had a amending motion last time. I ended up with the same result. I like to think that over the 4 years, I've learned to lose gracefully because I've lost my share of votes. So I'm not prepared to flog that. I'm prepared to support the motion. I'm a big boy. I do believe that our remuneration should reflect a sizable amount of public service, but I'm perfectly capable of making donations to any and all places I feel like to satisfy my conscience on that matter. So sure, that's of course, assuming I have to wrestle with that issue should I get elected again. But this is actually an interesting thing in reading the bylaw. Number 2E, members of council to be offered the extended health and dental benefits being offered to the Union of British Columbia municipalities with 100% of the cost being paid by the members of council. I didn't think that was available 4 years ago. I don't know if that's a change. I thought I was told that it would, A, I was too old, and B, there would have to be at least 3 members of council participating. So we should be careful about putting that in a bylaw and promising people things that may or may not be achievable. So I don't know if anybody in the room tonight can answer that question, or if that's something that should be taken under advisement to see.
We can certainly confirm with our benefit provider the possibilities.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. To Councillor Parkinson's point, I remember being offered and declining gracefully because I didn't need it at the time, is my recollection. To the motion itself, Your Worship, just a few comments. We asked some of our very own residents to undertake this endeavor, and I think it's disingenuous and disrespectful for us to continuously question the results of this committee made up of some people that I know are highly competent and intelligent residents. They came back with the numbers, and we are left with the job of endorsing that or not. I choose to take an approach that I trust and value their input and their deliberations and the process, and that the numbers they came back with are not the highest and not the lowest. And I believe that it's time that we move this forward. So to Councillor Day's point about that times are tough. I agree, times are tough and tough for some people in our residents. Rather than being, I prefer to take more of a more hopeful view here. Maybe one of those struggling people is watching this and has now undertaken the process of perhaps running for this next election based on the results of the work done by this committee and perhaps the endorsement of this council. I believe that someone should not have to choose between working for part-time somewhere for minimum wage or mostly slightly more than minimum wage now, as we all know, there's some staffing pressures, and meaningful public service. I'm sorry, but it's not my parents' generation where dad went to work and mom stayed home and one income was fine for 3 young boys. It's not that way anymore. 2 parents need to work to be able to sustain a family in a decent lifestyle in this community, probably most communities. So it is a very small ask. That funding envelope for the increased portion, without referring to it accurately, is just over $100,000 per year on a multi-million-dollar budget that is managed at this table. And I don't believe that's too much to ask, and my family is happy to open up our wallets for this small lift as well. Thank you, Worship.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much. So considering what you just said, Councillor Baxter, I am going to put a motion. I'm thinking about this right now, and what the solution is here. Just to clarify one thing, no one's questioning, the great bunch of citizens that got together and decided to volunteer for this committee. Having done lots of committee work before, as a volunteer, it's a thankless job, and I understand that. But the analogy that I want to put forward here, it's, if I break my leg, I don't go to the dentist to get it fixed. And I'm just, we didn't have the expertise of anyone that's done salary or compensation, that expertise on the committee. So it's not questioning that. I mean, if we had that guidance and that person with that experience, I think it would have been a fair thing for the taxpayer. But so I guess maybe the solution to this, where I can reconcile this in my own head right now, instead of bringing the committee back here, but it's I think I'd like to make the motion if we can perhaps bring a compensation expert in and just to review the work that's been done and confirm it. I think that's the least we can do. I strongly believe this. So that would be my motion on this right now. I don't know. I just want something that's fair. So I think that's the way. I think this is the best way to get closure on this item. So I'd like to make that motion.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Day. Thank you. Councillor Day.
Sure. I just wanted to speak to why I think that might be valuable. There were a number of sources of income that weren't considered, including monies that we receive for whoever represents this council on the CRD, on the water board. Those are all paying positions. So those are things that should be taken into consideration when we talk about the hours that each of us has to put in our respective roles. And I think it should take into consideration the number of committees that you serve on, because there have been some terms where I've served on as many as 6 or 7 committees, and it's been very onerous, and that's very different from just coming to council. Thank you.
Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I appreciate Councillor Kobayashi's suggestion. I guess I have 2 difficulties with that. One is that the if you brought in a professional to review it, at this point, it's going to spend money that, you know, and if they agreed with it, then you're just increasing the overall cost to pay. And the other one is that the whole purpose of doing this the way the province recommends it is that the outgoing council makes the decision. And there isn't really, I don't think, enough time left to bring somebody in and make a decision before the election. It's been suggested that we should not make the decision, but the decision should be made by a new council, which I think is actually precisely what the province or provincial recommendation was seeking to avoid, because if you have a new council make the recommendation, make the decision, pass the bylaw, then the voters have 4 years before they can express their definitive opinion on that in an election. Whereas if we make the recommendation, pass the bylaw around this table, the citizens get to have their definitive opinion on that expressed in what, a couple of weeks. And that is the purpose of doing it now.
Councillor Jansen, then Kobayashi.
Thank you, Worship. Just one small thought. I think what this committee did was reasonable, and the numbers they came back with were reasonable. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if a professional firm looks at this compensation and declares that it's been undervalued and it should be increased. And then what we're left with, another decision that is going to be a difficult one. And so I think, again, it's not much of an ask, and I respect the outcome from this committee work, and I will honor that, which I believe, and I agree completely with what Councillor Baxter says. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Just to clarify something, Councillor Baxter, actually the UBCM guide doesn't tell you when to do it. It's not in there. And so I just want to make that really clear, because I don't know how many of you actually read it. I got a little bit anal about it, took a real deep dive into it. And you know, everything, there's a lot of things, golden rules that they've recommended, and then what not to do. And we've broken some of those cardinal rules when we did this by committee. It's one of the methods. Okay, so committee work is one of the methods. Consultant is another method, and the third method is using your own staff to do it. So it's really clear how they prescribe you do it. And the one thing they absolutely recommend not to do is what we did do, and we used one criteria: population. So I just want to clarify that. That's why it's suspect, and that's why I called the chair of the committee and I asked. And I'm not trying to say we don't deserve something. You know, it should be better. I do think it has to be better. It's pretty clear to me, but it's just the magnitude of it. It's just mind-boggling. And you know, and I guess that's what I see right now. And you know, when we actually say that there are people that are really struggling out there, that are, you know, a couple $100 from deciding if they're going to feed themselves or pay the rent, it exists here in Colwood. It really exists. And respectfully, Michael's right. Councillor Baxter is right about something $15 a head. But actually on a door-to-door basis, you know, assuming we have about, you know, just over 6,000 doors here, that's $50 a door. And that's, you know, that bites into that $200 away from going broke. So that's how I look at it. So you can cut the numbers any which way to feed your own story, but that's the reality. So that's why I'm kind of passionate about this, you know. So anyways, thank you very much. So that's, my motion still stands.
Thank you. For myself, council passed a terms of reference. on how this committee was going to be run. And I sincerely wish we had that discussion when we passed the terms of reference. Councillor Jansen. Okay. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? So this is on the motion, Councillor Kobayashi's motion to look for a professional consultant to do a review. I'm paraphrasing, but perhaps you could say the actual motion.
Yes, that a consultant be hired to, a compensation expert be hired to review the work that was done by the committee.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, in fact, maybe to alleviate some of Councillor Baxter's concern, maybe there's someone in the community that would absolutely volunteer to do this for us that is an expert in this. Just another idea. Now you got me going, Councillor Baxter. Anyways, yeah, so yes, that's how it is.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other discussion, so I will call the question. Those in opposition to the motion? Councillor Parkinson, Logan, Jansen, Mayor Martin, Baxter. So that motion fails. That brings us back to the main motion. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition, Councillor Day and Kobayashi. Second to last, motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Logan. Those in opposition, nobody opposes.